How you, men of Athens, have been affected by my accusers, I do not know. For my part, even I nearly forgot myself because of them, so persuasively did they speak, and yet they've said, so to speak, nothing true. I wondered most at one of the many falsehoods they told when they said that you should be aware that you are not deceived by me, since I am a clever speaker. They are not ashamed that they will immediately be refuted by me indeed, as soon as it becomes apparent that I am not a clever speaker at all. This seemed to be the most shameless of them, unless of course they call a clever speaker the one who speaks the truth. For if this is what they are saying, then I too would agree that I am an orator, but not of their sort. So they, as I say, have said little or nothing true, while from me you will hear the whole truth. But by Zeus, men of Athens, not beautifully spoken speeches like theirs adorned with phrases and words. Rather, what you hear will be spoken at random in the words that I happen upon, for I trust that these things I say are just, and let none of you expect otherwise. For surely it would not be becoming, men, for someone of my age to come before you fabricating speeches like a youth. And, men of Athens, I do very much beg and beseech this of you. If you hear me speaking in my defence with the same speeches I am accustomed to speak both in the marketplace, at the money tables, where many of you have heard me, and elsewhere, do not wonder or make a disturbance because of this. For this is how it is. Now, this is the first time that I have come before a law court at the age of 70, hence I am simply foreign to the manner of speech here, so, just as if I really did happen to be a foreigner, you would surely sympathise with me if I spoke in the dialect and the way in which I was raised. Also, I do beg this of you now, and it is just, at least as it seems to me, leave aside the manner of my speech, for perhaps it may be worse, but perhaps better, and instead consider this very thing and apply your mind to this, whether the things I say are just or not. For this is the virtue of a judge, while that of an orator is to speak the truth. So first, men of Athens, it is just for me to speak in defence against the first false charges against me and the first accusers, and next against the later charges and the later accusers, for many have accused me to you even long ago, talking now for many years and saying nothing true, and I fear them more than Anytus and those around him, although they too are dangerous. But the others are more dangerous men. They got hold of many of you from childhood, and they accused me and persuaded you, although it is no more true than the present charge that there is a certain Socrates, a wise man, a thinker on things aloft, who has investigated all things under the earth, and who makes the weaker speech the stronger. Those men of Athens who have scattered this report about are my dangerous accusers, for the listeners hold that investigators of these things also do not believe in gods. Besides, there are many of these accusers, and they have been accusing for a long time now. Moreover, they spoke to you at the age when you were most trusting, when some of you were children and youths. They accused me in a case that simply went by default, for no one spoke in my defence. And the most unreasonable thing of all is that it is not even possible to know and to say their names unless a certain one happens to be a comic poet. Those who persuaded you by using envy and slander, and those who persuaded others after being convinced themselves, all of these most difficult to get at. For it is also not possible to have any of them come forward here and to refute them, but it is necessary for me simply to speak in my defence as though fighting with shadows and refuting with no one to answer. So you too must deem it to be as I say, that there have been two groups of accusers, the ones accusing me now, and the others long ago of whom I speak. And you must also suppose that I should speak first in defence against the latter, for you heard them accusing me earlier, and much more than these later ones here. Well then, a defence speech must be made, men of Athens, and an attempt must be made in this short time to take away from you this slander which you acquired over a long time. Now I would wish that it may turn out like this, if it is in any way better both for you and for me, and that I may accomplish something by making a defence speech, but I suppose this is hard, and I am not at all unaware of what sort of thing it is. Nevertheless, let this proceed in whatever way is dear to the god. But the law must be obeyed and defence speech must be made. So let us take up from the beginning what the accusation is from which has arisen the slander against me, which in fact is what Meletus trusted in when he brought this indictment against me. Well then, what did the slanderers say to slander me? Their sworn statement, though as though they were the accusers, must be read. Socrates does injustice and is meddlesome by investigating things under the earth and the heavenly things, and by making the weaker speech the stronger, and by teaching others the same things. It is something like this. For you yourselves used to see these things in the comedy of Aristophanes. A certain Socrates was carried around here, claiming that he was treading on air and sprouting much other than drivel, about which I have no expertise, either much or little. And I do not say this to dishonour this sort of knowledge. If anyone is wise in such things, may I never be prosecuted with such great lawsuits by Meletus. But in fact I, men of Athens, have no share in these things. Again, I offer the many of you as witnesses, and I maintain that you should teach and tell each other, those of you who have ever heard me conversing. And there are many such among you. Tell each other, then, if any of you have ever heard me conversing about such things, either much or little. And from this you will recognize that the same holds also for the other things that many have said about me. But in fact, none of these things is so, and if you have heard from anyone that I attempt to educate human beings and make money from it, that is not true either. Though this too seems to me to be noble, if one should be able to educate human beings like Georgius of Leontini, and Prodicus of Ceos, and Hippias of Elis. For each of them, men, is able, going into each of the cities to persuade the young, who can associate with whomever of their own citizens they wish to for free. They persuade these young men to leave off their associations with the latter and to associate with themselves instead, and to give them money and acknowledge gratitude besides. And as for that, there is another man here from Paros, a wise man who I perceived was in town, for I happened to meet a man who has paid more money to sophists than all the others, Callias the son of Hipponicus. So I questioned him, for he has 2 sons. Callias, I said, if your 2 sons had been born colts or calves, we would have been able to get and hire an overseer for them who could make the 2 of them noble and good in their appropriate virtue. And he would have been someone from among these skilled with horses or skilled in farming. But as it is, since they are 2 human beings, whom do you have in mind to get as an overseer for the 2 of them? Who is knowledgeable in such virtue, that of human being and citizen? For I suppose that you've considered it, since you possess sons. Is there someone? I said, or not? Quite so, he said. Who? I said. And where is he from, and how much does he teach? Evenus, he said, Socrates, from Paros, 5 minae, and I regarded Evenus as blessed if he surely should have this art, and teaches at such a modest rate. As for myself, I would be pluming and priding myself on it if I had knowledge of these things, but I do not have knowledge of them. Men of Athens, perhaps then one of you might retort, well, Socrates, what is your affair? Where have all these slanders against you come from? For surely, if you were in fact practicing nothing more uncommon than others, such a report and account would not then have arisen, unless you were doing something different from the many. So tell us what it is, so that we do not have to deal unadvisedly with you. In this, it seems to me, what the speaker says is just, and I will try to demonstrate to you whatever it is that has brought me this name and slander. So listen. Now perhaps I will seem to some of you to be joking. Know well, however, that I will tell you the whole truth. For I, men of Athens, have gotten this name through nothing but a certain wisdom. Just what sort of wisdom is this? That which is perhaps human wisdom, for probably I really am wise in this. But for those of whom I just spoke might perhaps be wise in some wisdom greater than human, or else I cannot say what it is. For I, at least, do not have knowledge of it. But whoever asserts that I do lies and speaks in order to slander me. Now, please, men of Athens, do not make a disturbance, not even if I seem to you to be boasting somewhat, for not mine is the story that I will tell. Rather, I'll refer it to a speaker trustworthy of you, of my wisdom, if indeed it is wisdom of any kind, and not what sort of thing it is. I will offer you as a witness the god in Delphi. Now you know Sheriphon, no doubt he was my comrade from youth, as well as a comrade of your multitude, and he shared in your recent exile and returned with you. You do know what sort of man Sheriphon was, how vehement he was in whatever he would set out to do, and in particular he once ran to Delphi and dared to consult the oracle about this. Now, as I say, do not make a disturbance, men. And he asked whether there was anyone wiser than I. The Pythia replied that no one was wiser, and concerning these things his brother here will witness for you, since he himself has met his end. Now consider why I say these things. I'm going to teach you where the slander against me has come from. When I heard these things, I pondered them like this. Whatever is the god saying, and what riddle is he posing? For I am conscious that I am not at all wise, either much or little. So whatever is he saying when he claims that I am wisest? Surely he is not saying something false, at least, for that is not sanctioned for him. And for a long time I was at a loss as to whatever he was saying. But then, very reluctantly, I turned to something like the following investigation of it. I went to one of those reputed to be wise on the ground that there, if anywhere, I could refute the divination, and show the oracle, this man is wiser than I. But you declared that I was wisest, so I considered him thoroughly. I need not speak of him by name, but he was one of the politicians. And when I considered him and conversed with him, men of Athens, I was affected something like this. It seemed to me that this man seemed to be wise both to many other human beings and most of all to himself, but that he was not. And then I tried to show him that he supposed he was wise, but he was not. So from this I became hateful to both him and many of those present. For my part, as I went away, I reasoned with regard to myself. I am wiser than this human being, for probably neither of us knows anything noble and good. But he supposes he knows something when he does not know, while I, just as I do not know, do not even suppose that I do. I am likely to be a little wiser than he in this very thing, for whatever I do not know, I do not even suppose I know. From there, I went to someone else, to one of those reputed to be wiser than he, and these things seemed to me to be the same, and there I became hateful both to him and many others. After this, then, I kept going to one after another, and all the while perceiving with pain and fear that I was becoming hated. Nevertheless, it seemed to be necessary to regard the matter of God as most important, so I had to go, in considering what the oracle was saying, to all those reputed to know something. And by the dog, men of Athens, for it is necessary to speak the truth before you, I swear I was affected something like this. Those with the best reputations seemed to me nearly the most deficient in my investigation in accordance with the god, while others with more paltry reputations seemed to be men more fit in regard to being prudent. Indeed, I must display my wandering to you as a performing of certain labours, so that the divination would turn out to be unrefuted. After the politicians I went to the poets, those of tragedies and dithyrambs, then the others, in order that I should catch myself in the act of being more ignorant than they. So I would take up those poems of theirs which it seemed to me they had worked on the most, and I would ask them thoroughly what they meant, so that I might also learn something from them at the same time. I am ashamed to tell you the truth, men, nevertheless, it must be said, almost everyone present, so to speak, would have spoken better than the poets did about the poetry they themselves had made. So again, also concerning the poets, I soon recognise that they do not make what they make by wisdom, but by some sort of nature and well inspired, like the diviners and those who deliver oracles. For they too say many noble things, but they know nothing of what they speak. It was apparent to me that the poets are also affected in the same sort of way. At the same time, I perceived that they supposed, on account of their poetry, that they were the wisest of human beings also in other things, in which they were not. So I went away from there too, supposing that it turned out that I was superior to them in the very same thing in which I was to the politicians. Finally then, I went to the manual artisans, for I was conscious that I had knowledge of nothing, so to speak, but I knew that I would discover that they, at least, had knowledge of many noble things. And I was not played false by this. They did indeed have knowledge of things which I did not have knowledge of, and in this way they were wiser than I. But, men of Athens, the good craftsman also seemed to me to be wrong in the same way as the poets. Because he performed his art nobly, each one deemed himself wisest also in other things, the greatest things, and this discordant note of theirs seemed to hide that wisdom. So I asked myself on behalf of the oracle whether I would prefer to be as I am, being in no way wise in their wisdom or ignorant in their ignorance, or to have both things that they have. I answered myself and the oracle that it profits me to be just as I am.